Now to the story of a serviceman who was never in a war zone but still witnessed horrific deaths while in the Air Force on the flight lines where he worked as a crew chief. Scott Aubin, who's from Chazy, says he dealt with those traumatic experiences for years by abusing alcohol. And that led to his discharge from the Air Force, broken marriages, and even time in jail. After hitting rock bottom and a suicide attempt, Aubin was treated for post-traumatic stress and now travels across the state and country as a speaker for the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services Trauma Program, sharing his story about undiagnosed PTSD and suicide awareness. Scott Aubin has co-written and published a new book about his life before and after recovery. And Scott Aubin joins us now with his service dog, Dash. Welcome, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Tom. Good to see you too.
Your new book has just been released telling the story of how you struggled with the effects of PTSD while you served in the Air Force and how it really messed up your life.
Very much so, very much so.
And your military career as well. It all but ended your military career.
It did. You know, just with my struggles with my PTSD and my coping mechanisms, which, you know, I was using a lot of alcohol. It pretty much ended my career at the 21-year mark, abruptly.
It went undiagnosed for years. You, as you just mentioned, abused alcohol for many years while you served in the Air Force. It helped you deal with several traumatic events that happened to you in the Air Force that you get into in the book.
Yes.
There were a couple of times where you witnessed death.
Yes.
Right before your eyes.
Very much so. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, you know, when I first joined the Air Force, they sent me down to Griffiths Air Force Base. And, you know, never in a million years, this was during peacetime, you know. And a lot of people think about PTSD as being something that military men experience while in combat or in war. Mine just happened to be peacetime, or especially at Griffiths. And I was involved with a tire explosion where 2 young men lost their lives, and they were right next to me. It was an F-106 tire.
Okay.
We were in a competition to see who can get our tires done the quickest.
And it blew up and it violently killed.
Yeah, it basically took one from his chest up. And then the other one was a traumatic blow where it took his life as well. And like I said, I had, you know, pieces and parts of them on me. And at the end of the day, you know, they were more concerned about my physical well-being versus my mental well-being. And the only way I can deal with that, I can remember at 4 o'clock in the morning, sitting with the guys in the dorm after, and the ringing in my ears was still going on, but we drank. And we drank and drank and drank to just drink it away.
And then so a few years later, you were with the Air Force on assignment in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And you were doing maintenance on planes, and as you mentioned in the book, in Saudi Arabia with the temperatures so hot, there's the constant fear of the fumes in the planes. Those fumes can explode, and that's what happened before your eyes.
Right. Basically what happens is, you know, the most dangerous part of an airplane when it's more volatile is not when it's full of fuel, it's when it's empty, because it's just full of vapors. Obviously when gasoline or kerosene or jet fuel burns, it's the fumes that burn. So we were depuddling or defueling this airplane, and the temperature on the ramp had to be 115 degrees that day, maybe a little bit more. But then you get the convection-wise from the ramp and everything else, so it made it even that much hotter, to the point where if you stood in one spot too long, your boots would stick to the ground. And this one day, we were depuddling, taking fuel out of the plane, and it was going into a 55-gallon drum. And these 4 Saudis were walking in, because I was with the Air Force, but this was on a Saudi airplane. And the Saudis walked in, and I reminded them to ground themselves, you know, dissipate the static electricity from their body. And I wasn't paying attention to them. They walked in behind me, and then from behind me, I heard this big pop. And before I knew it, I turned to look, and the barrel was on fire. And all we could do was just run. You know, it's fight or flight, and it was about time to flight. So I took about 3 steps forward, and that's when it blew. And before I knew it, I was laying on the ground. I was looking back, and that's when I saw 4 guys burn to death. And again, it had messed my knee up pretty good. I couldn't get up. And I just laid there on the ground. I couldn't move, and I was shocked.
Then you came back to the States?
I came back to the States.
And how long did it take for this all to build up and you really to start having trouble dealing with this?
This was back in like 1998, 99 time frame, and then I was back in the States around the same time, because I remember I was home in Vermont for the New Year's of 2000. So, and then it was finally, everything was building up in me, and I was going through several surgeries on my knee, but I was back doing my job in the Air Guard and with the Air Force, and then September 11th hit. And I honestly believe that September 11th was my breaking point. That's where I lost it. I totally lost it. Because I felt, a part of you, I became very good friends with a lot of Saudis. And so once, that happened and everybody instantly knew, especially within the military community, we knew it was terrorism. And then instantly I knew it was, probably an Arab state or, and I just became very angry and very mad. But all my issues came out. Everything just came out, and I was a mess. I mean, my drinking was horrible. I mean, to the point where, I became a horrible father. I was a horrible husband. It cost me a lot of relationships with good friends, and I just couldn't cope. And I was making a lot of bad choices, and before I knew it, the guard came down on me through the Air Force, and I was forced out in 2000. Finally, the final act was in 2005.
And then you came back and you had trouble adjusting.
Oh, horrible, horrible trouble. I never got any kind of, help. I never went to a counselor. I never did any of that. And the only way I could cope was by drinking, and I was going through a lot of relationships, and I wasn't a very nice guy. And I talk a lot about how there's reasons versus excuses. I had reasons why I was the way I was, but it still doesn't give me the excuse to do what I did. But I was struggling. I was a struggling mess. I couldn't hold a job for more than a year. The triggers of that job were just so much that I had to get out of there just so I can go drink, just so I could numb my pain. And before I knew it, I ended up in jail because of some bad choices I made.
You hit rock bottom October 2014?
October 26, 2014.
And you tried to take your own life.
I did. I always talk. It's still very hard for me to talk about it. Yeah. But you're really at the lowest of lows. You really get to that bottom point where you just feel like, you want to die, but you really don't want to die. You just want that pain to end. And I was there, and I literally put that rope around my neck and I jumped off the ladder. And, obviously my knot tying skills weren't good enough, and I hit the floor. But it was that point when I was laying on the floor, there was like a sense of calm about me after I came to. The cops had come in because I'd already called 911, told them where they could find me. Mm-hmm. So everybody was in the garage where I was at, and I just remember laying there, but there was that sense of calm. And then one of the cops that came in happened to know me, and he said, "Scott, we need to get you some help." And I said, "Yes, please do." And that's when I finally was open to getting help, because you don't get any more lower than that.
And is that when the PTSD diagnosis finally came?
Yes, I finally got my PTSD diagnosis. Shortly after that, they took me to the hospital. Then I ended up down in Brattleboro, Vermont at the Uniform Services Program through the Brattleboro Retreat. And I went, the Uniform Services Program, it's not just for veterans, it's also for uniform services, being law enforcement, corrections, fire, EMS. So I went away and got that help there, and that's when I finally started to open up, or not open up, but I started talking to other people, realizing I wasn't alone. And I still, in the beginning, wasn't sharing a lot of my story, until finally, the service dog aspect came into it, and that's when I started to open up. It changed my life. It really did. I honestly give a lot of my credit to my dog, just in the fact that she's given me a voice. She's given me, with the mobility options that I had with my knee at the time. But I found out that more and more and more that she was really helping me with my PTSD. She was my comfort. She was my security blanket. And it helped me immensely.
So as you were getting back on track, it was then that a friend who works at the Clinton County Jail, reached out to you
Yeah.
and said, would you come in to the jail? There is a despondent young veteran here,
Yes.
suicidal, and would you come in and talk with him?
Yes.
And you were reluctant at first.
Well, so you can imagine my surprise thinking, oh my God, what does the jail want? So I agree. We went in and I sat there with the veteran and a few of the officers, and I proceeded to talk to this veteran, saying you're not alone. And I just started talking, and then it was shortly after that Sheriff Favreau said, my God, Scott, you got a story to be told. And it just launched other aspects.
And they put you in touch with various groups that
Yep.
really thinking that your story would benefit them, not only people with PTSD, but law enforcement, corrections officers, others.
And a lot of the symptoms that I went through, a lot of these law enforcement guys are going through, or even first responders. And so we go travel around, and they give me a 2-hour block where I stand up and I tell my story for 2 hours. And it's had a major impact.
Online, we talk about the trauma Scott Aubin also experienced as a child when he was abused by a family friend, trauma he kept hidden for much of his life. He also talks about how he and Dash were paired. Some of the proceeds from the book will go to the Service Dog Project in Massachusetts. You can watch our extended interview at mountainlake.org.